Simon and myself are joined here in studio by a man we know well. The Times chief sports correspondent Matt Lawton is with us, and alongside Matt is a long-time agent in the world of football, Sky Andrew. So this lunchtime, we bring you a story breaking in the last few moments, which centres around the use of unlicensed agents. The man across the story is the man I've just mentioned, the Times chief sports correspondent Matt Lawton, who's been involved in this story over the past 2 years. It centres around one particular transfer dating back to 2008, when Jermain Defoe moved from Tottenham to Portsmouth. Sky, good to see you, but first Matt. Matt, can you give us the background to this?
January 2008, Jermain Defoe, at the time an England footballer, moved from Tottenham to Portsmouth. It led to an arbitration because Sky was of the view that Jermain Defoe was in breach of his contract, because a footballer can not use his agent if he basically does the negotiation himself. But the view was that he'd used a guy called Stuart Peters, a licensed agent, and the assistance also of Mitchell Thomas, the ex-footballer, ex-Tottenham and West Ham footballer, who was an unlicensed agent. So there was an arbitration, a private arbitration, and there was some reporting around this at the time, but we don't get to hear in these arbitrations what's happened. We don't get to hear the outcome or anything. Actually, what we now know is that the outcome of this was that Sky won the case, and the panel of 3 QCs at the time, KCs now obviously, but the panel concluded that Mitchell Thomas, an unlicensed agent, had been a central figure in this negotiation.
Well, and had done the deal.
Had basically helped broker the deal, and had been involved in dealing with Tottenham, with Daniel Levy, the Tottenham chairman, had dealt with Harry Redknapp, the Portsmouth manager, had dealt on countless occasions on the day of the transfer with Defoe himself. And this was all detailed in phone records that had to be acquired through a High Court application. And once the panel had these phone records, they then realised that there were potential breaches of the of FIFA agent rules and FA agent rules, and these rules are in place to protect the integrity not just of football but of the transfer market. They're very serious rules that have to be complied with. Because
so in this instance, Matt, can you break down the potential breaches?
So the potential breaches were
the implication for the individuals involved.
The potential breaches were dealing with an unlicensed agent, and on that day, as the phone record showed, that they were all talking to the unlicensed agent. But also there was a further issue raised by the panel, which was that the agent that Tottenham did enlist, there was no evidence in the hearing that there was a formal representation contract in place, and you have to have one of those as well. So 2 potential breaches. When Luton Town, in the same year, were found to have paid agents without representation contracts, they received a 10-point deduction. When Massimo Cellino at Leeds was found in 2017 to have dealt with an unlicensed agent, he was banned from football for a year, received a £250,000 fine, and the entire Leeds board had to go on an education course on how to deal with football intermediaries. So again, I want to emphasise, these are serious breaches. Now, at the end of such an arbitration, the arbitrators send the file to the FA. We don't believe that the FA did anything about this case. We don't believe that there were any charges issued or sanctions. Obviously, well, there weren't any sanctions. No one got punished for this, right? At the time, Jermain Defoe was an England footballer. He played in the World Cup that summer, by the time this award was given in early 2010. The FA have confirmed that no action was taken. They also, based on the statement they've given us, they are not clear that they received all the relevant information, and now what they are saying is that if the full detail of this case comes to light, which we are revealing in the Times now, then they will review the case.
Okay, Matt. Sky, welcome. Sky Andrew is with us this lunchtime. Top agent, of course, I've known you for years. You're in dispute with Jermain Defoe. I understand, Sky, that you can't talk about the arbitration as such, and I fully get that. But you've worked in football, Sky. You're vastly experienced. You've worked in the game for well over 30 years. What would you have expected to have happened here following the arbitration hearing? They clearly didn't happen.
First and foremost, to actually take up an arbitration is really difficult. And I'd like to think that the governing bodies will realise that it costs a lot of money to do it, and some people just haven't got the money to do it, and that it has to be about getting the truth and having everything being fair for everybody involved, participants. I can't speak about the arbitration, it's so long ago. And
I understand.
And you haven't lived until you get a phone call from Matt Lawton saying blah blah blah, because this guy's like Martin Keown. He just man marks you, and until he's even got me coming today.
Rubbish, but that's a
no, but people.
So carry on. What do you want to say this lunchtime, Sky?
No, arbitrations need to be taken seriously. I mean, it's supposed to be a serious process where people get evidence and people get to the truth. Once that happens, I think that the governing bodies then have to look at it and see if there is anyone that's done anything wrong or anything like that. Because otherwise, what's the point of an arbitration? The whole point of it is to be a court of law outside the court of law, and a confidential process which comes to a conclusion. And once it comes to a conclusion, then it has to go to the next phase. And what Matt tells me is that it didn't go to the next phase, and the governing bodies, I can't say that they haven't done anything because I don't know that process, but it does seem that nothing's happened.
So it all centres on the use of an unlicensed agent.
Yes.
In this instance. What are Tottenham saying to it? What are Portsmouth saying to it?
They're both refusing to comment at the moment. They've declined to comment.
You've spoken with Harry. You've spoken with.
I've spoken with Harry. I've spoken with Harry Redknapp, who did speak to Mitchell Thomas on the day of the transfer. Now he couldn't recall that, so obviously it was 15 years ago. But in fairness to Harry, what he did acknowledge was that at the time he did think that Mitchell Thomas was Jermain Defoe's agent. So because at the time when I spoke to him last week, he couldn't recall speaking to Thomas. He said, I wasn't really involved in the deal. He did obviously meet Jermain Defoe and his mum when they came down on the day, and was there when he had the medical. But I said, no, there are phone records that show that you did speak to Mitchell Thomas. So he said, well, to be fair, I would have thought he was his agent. So, I would have, then fair enough kind of thing.
Yeah.
Because I did think Mitchell Thomas was his agent. But then I asked him, I said, well, okay, but were you then contacted by the FA to ask you about the fact that you had spoken to an unlicensed agent on the day of that transfer? And to his knowledge, he never had a call from the FA to say this. Because what we have to realise here, Jim, is that the jurisdiction of the panel in the arbitration was simply to determine, settle a dispute between Jermain Defoe and his agent at the time.
Right.
But once that happens, and it was interesting, I spoke to one of the top sports barristers in the country ahead of this story. We took independent legal advice and all this stuff. Mm. And the point that they always make to a client is, while these arbitrations are confidential, if you think a regulatory issue is going to emerge that the FA could then act on and charge, you are better off settling. Because if it comes out in this arbitration that you broke FA rules, then the FA will charge you, and you will not want that. So it's better not to go to arbitration. The fact of the matter is that file would have gone to the FA, and at that point, the FA, in our view, should have at least initiated an investigation into potentially serious breaches of FA agent rules.
So why didn't they? And had they done, what would that look like in punishment terms?
At the moment, the FA can't explain why they didn't.
Why?
Because it seems apparent to me that they can't put their hands on the relevant documentation. That it seems apparent to me that they don't. That there's detail that they're only now finding out. Now, there are one or two people that were at the FA at the time, but a lot of people have changed. But they are still trying to determine what happened here and why it didn't progress. But what they have said in a statement to us is that if it now emerges that there is evidence of potential serious breaches, they will look at it.
So they will look at it. How retrospective can the FA be?
Well, this is if we look at the Manchester City and Chelsea cases, we have the Manchester City case, the potential breaches go back to a similar period. The Chelsea cases are looking at two transfers that happened in 2013. It's interesting, where UEFA were limited in dealing with these clubs by their own statute of limitations, that doesn't apply in English football. So I don't think there's any reason why the FA can't go back here. Right.
We're going to get Simon's take the other side of this upcoming break. Sky, you wanted to come in. What do you want to say just as we head to the break?
I was going to say that, there's nothing wrong with telling players to honour their contract, which is what I've done from day one. I say to players, honour your contract. If you get offered something and it's good, then you can take it. But I am fierce in representing clients. But I don't know, maybe this arbitration came about because of that. But I just wanted to make the point that players should honour their contracts, and then they should be penalised for honouring the contracts. Either way.
Simon, what's your take on this?
Well, first thing to say, there can be no surprise at any level of incompetence from the FA. So if the FA haven't done their job, it wouldn't surprise me in the slightest. I would suggest that the framework of regulations in the mid to late 2000s and going into 2010, when the money really started to ramp up, became ridiculously uncoordinated. 1 minute you're representing one individual, next minute you're able to represent two. The more regulation was required, the less regulation was there, because the industry was going through the ceiling economically. There seems to be three separate things at play here. There's the relationship that Sky has with Jermain Defoe with a representation agreement, which is why the arbitration hearing happened in the first place, because Sky has a relationship with Jerome. Jerome has a contractual obligation to Sky. Jermain, sorry. Jermain has a contractual obligation, so you have to, if Jermain or whoever's around him decides to induce him away from that, Sky has every right to say, hang on a second, you have a contract with me. And that's what the arbitration hearing probably he has every right to do that.
Yeah.
Every right to do that. You don't sign a contract with somebody. He's making a case for, I encourage my players to honour their contracts to football clubs.
Yeah.
Then they should encourage them to honour their obligations to agents.
What about the alleged use of an unlicensed agent?
Well, okay, let me get to it.
Right.
And then you've got the situation where what Matt is alluding to is that as a result of arbitration, it threw out something that arbitration is obliged to do, which is when you get a regulatory issue, is to upsize it to the next level of interrogation. It doesn't surprise me that the FA may have missed that. And then you compare and contrast it to what's happening to Luton and Leeds. And you say to yourself, okay, who was the engaged agent when Tottenham and Portsmouth did this deal? Was he a licensed agent? Was the licensed agent on the paperwork? Was that a facade for the intellectual capital behind the deal, which the assertion is Mitchell Thomas, because he's the one that's making the phone calls to Peter Storey or to Daniel Levy or whoever it is at Tottenham is dealing this particular deal.
Yeah.
And then you've got the comparison, which is why weren't potentially Tottenham and Portsmouth in the cart here for appearing to deal with an unauthorised agent, given that Luton and Leeds were. And then you say to yourself, well, were Luton and Leeds, did they sign an engagement relationship with a licensed agent? Because if they did, and ultimately it was an authorised agent that did it, but my understanding of it is that Luton didn't sign an agreement.
Well, no, the Luton case was simply that they paid, and it was £160,000 in total to a number of agents without representation contracts. Yeah. And that was their only offence here that led to a 10-point deduction.
So in the Spurs and Portsmouth mentality situation, where the Mitchell Thomas spectre looms, was there an engaged licensed agent on the paperwork?
Yes, but without it appears without a representation contract.
Right, and at this moment in time, do we know if monies were paid by Tottenham and or Portsmouth to said agents and then followed that trail?
So the agent who appears not to have had a representation contract, it emerged in the arbitration, was paid £1 million.
Right.
He said that no money was then passed to Mitchell Thomas, the unlicensed agent, even though the two of them had a prior business arrangement where they would any work they did together, they shared 50-50.
But there was you were in the game. You were in football at that time, Simon, operating at the top of the house at Palace. Were you aware of unlicensed agents operating within the game?
I'm aware of people that operate around the periphery of players that create influence. I didn't do it. It was a bugger to get me to deal with agents, full stop. So you're asking the wrong person whether I deal with an authorised and unauthorised agent. But I always dealt with agents that were regulated and governed. And you've got to remember that the rules and regulations were a moving feast all the time. I'm not giving anybody a pass here. I'm not giving anybody any excuse. But
was it on you as an owner to make sure they were licensed and governed?
Well, yeah, because you fill in the paperwork to be able to achieve that outcome.
Right, so you would know who's licensed and who's not.
Well, of course.
In the process of a deal.
But look, the key point here, right?
That's why
no one is saying at this stage that they are guilty of those breaches, right?
Say again, Matt.
No one is saying at this stage that anyone is guilty of breaches of FA.
You want to know why
rules.
process wasn't followed?
Sure.
But let's ask Sky now. Sky, were you interviewed after the arbitration by the FA about potential breaches?
No, and
Well, there you go.
But why would he be?
Because
He's bought an arbitration. I'm sorry, have I missed something? He bought an arbitration.
Because through the High Court, he acquired the phone records that were critical in the final decision.
Why would the FA ask Sky about license? Sky's a licensed agent that had a contract with.
Because you might ask him.
Jermain Defoe.
You might ask him for the phone records.
Yeah, I'm understanding that, but I'm trying to understand. Jermaine's Sky's case was, I want to determine an outcome of a contract that someone's breached, and that's been determined.
Yeah.
So what you're then asking for is joined up thinking, which is that the FA should have been on this and gone, why don't we investigate whatever else Sky may know? Given the fact he's got a breach of contract, clearly the agent's been
within this arbitration, the conclusion should be that within this arbitration, it would appear there may have been breaches of FA agent regulations.
Yeah.
Therefore, you would assume that once it's emerged that there are phone records that actually, in the view of the panel, say that this unlicensed agent was a central figure in the deal, you would then think that the FA would interview everyone concerned,
and you were not interviewed, Sky,
including speaking to the guy that had the phone records.
But I noticed that when I was saying about players honouring their contract, Simon had a little smirk. But the thing is, the truth of this matter is that players can't win. If players honour their contract and the clubs want to keep them, then that's a problem. If players honour their contracts and clubs want to sell them, and then so all I'm saying is, let's just get it straight here. Agents, clubs, everybody should be happy if a player honours his contract.
I wasn't smirking at that. I was smirking at the ridiculous assertion that you guys empathise with players honouring their contracts.
Don't say you guys.
Well, you guys, a lot of you in your fraternity.
No.
You can't make money from moves.
You can't make a sweeping generalisation.
I can.
No, you can't. Don't be ridiculous.
I perceive you to be a homogenous group that all act and operate in the same
ridiculous.
way. Because the principles of how you make money, and everyone knows is that you make money from moves.
You are. No. You're absolutely wrong. You're absolutely wrong. I'll tell you why. Because you can't make a sweeping generalisation about a group of people who act differently. I'm telling you that I've told every single player I've ever represented to honour their contract. Sometimes the clubs might not be happy with that, especially if a player is honouring their contract and they've got a value attached to them, right? So you say a lot of good things, but what you've just said there is just absolutely ridiculous. You cannot make a sweeping generalisation about any group of people.
Because I've dealt with most of you, and I've seen most of you, and you might be the exception, Sky, but your reputation isn't as up there as you might think it is. And 99% of agents, including the guys at the very top...
don't get personal. Don't get personal
about agents.
Yes, you are. Yes, you are.
Making an observation.
Have you dealt with Sky directly?
No.
Well, then, that's just ridiculous, isn't it?
But I'm well aware of how the industry is held together, so I can make the sweeping statement.
Have you dealt with 4,000 agents then? Is that what you're saying?
No, I haven't.
Well, then don't say statements like I've dealt with 99% of agents.
I understand the agent fraternity very well, and your modus operandi, and the way you make money is by engineering, orchestrating movies.
When we come back, the other side of the 12:30 bulletin, if you're willing, Matt, we'll hold on to you in Sky, because obviously it's a developing story and we want to stay with it. We want to hear the answers to such questions as, what are Tottenham, Portsmouth and the FA now saying? What is their defence? And again, for those who are getting in touch this lunchtime, the question I see on some of the messages coming in is the constant question is, how retrospective can the FA be, and what does that look like? Stay with us, more after this. Back in 2008, unlicensed agents could operate. Were operating at that time. This fell because the regulations were so bad.
Well,
Sky, of course, had signed on the dotted line and could operate legally and appropriately, and did. But there were others who didn't.
No, the regulations that were FIFA rules as well as FA rules are very clear on the use of unlicensed agents. It was forbidden. And in fact, in 2008, there was a list published by the FA that was sent out to every club in the country saying these people are operating as unlicensed agents and you must not use them.
Yeah.
Mitchell Thomas was on that list, right?
He was on that list.
He was on that list.
And this is the individual at the heart of this matter.
So the fact of the matter is, as I say, what this story is about is what happened next and whether the FA did actually act on it. And it doesn't appear they did, evidenced by the fact that no one appeared to get a phone call about it. There wasn't an investigation. The FA can't find any evidence of an investigation, and I basically have said on the record that this thing was not taken any further.
And if they had got a call, and if it had been proven, we could have been talking about points deductions.
And yet, 3 QCs, including Sherry Boo, the wife of Tony Blair, concluded that Mitchell Thomas had basically been the go-between, operating on the day of the transfer with the chairman of Tottenham, with the manager of Portsmouth, with the player on multiple occasions, and the licensed agent who had been brought in on the deal, who also didn't have a proper representation contract, it would appear.
Simon, obviously, as Simon has demonstrated, I've known it for years, has his own view about agents licensed and unlicensed. And he's entitled to have that view. But this lunchtime, you are a licensed agent, always have been. Hence the respect you get in the game. But are you aware, even now, that unlicensed agents are operating out there?
Yeah, look, the problem in football mainly is inducement to young players, to parents, and I don't advocate for agents to do that. But what I'd like to see is a level playing field and people being asked to abide by the rules and regs, and then if they don't abide by the rules and regs, whoever they are, but there's a system in place to bring out the truth. So for me, until people take arbitration seriously,
does that include the players, Sky? Does that include the player in this as well?
No, I think so.
Yeah, because if the player uses an unauthorised agent, then he should suffer consequences as well, shouldn't he?
Yeah, I mean that's a fair point. But at the end of the day, if people don't take the consequences seriously, then people are going to break rules. I mean, generally in football.
Does that go for owners as well, though, Simon? You say the player.
Yeah.
Owners too.
Yeah. Well, of course it should do. Of course it should do. And if people are dealing with a known component part of an unauthorised agent regime which has been notified by FIFA, then there's very little excuse. And there's very little excuse for a lot of things in football. That doesn't mean that people won't find one. I mean, the issue here leads in all different directions, doesn't it? It leads to the incompetency of the FA, to the behaviour of the football clubs involved, to the player. I mean, Sky, the innocent party in all of this is Sky. Sky had a contract with Jermain. He had to go and enforce it. That's his issue, and that's perhaps his disappointment, I suspect. But all the other aspects of it, on prima facie, they don't look particularly good. It doesn't. I mean, we start from the premise of it doesn't surprise me. I don't think it would surprise Matt that the level of competency inside football at times beggars belief, because the FA isn't a very cohesive unit. If you write a newspaper column, like I did a few times, they'll sanction you and bring you in front of an FA board, and people like Barry Bright will come along and give you a lecture about your life while you're bankrolling a football club. But if you do something that's far more convoluted, that requires a little bit more investigation and substance behind them, that's why we're in a conversation now where the game's governing body, or should be governing body, is being replaced by an independent regulator.
Yeah. In this instance, Matt, just to stress, Tottenham, any word. Portsmouth, any word. Defoe, any word.
Nothing. And we approached them on Friday and we've had no response. Well, they've responded in that they don't want to respond. And I think Simon's broader point is a really important one here, because what we're really talking about, at a time when we're looking at the government is looking to form this independent regulator, and I've sat in this chair before and we've talked about different stories and different cases. Sport is rubbish at regulating itself, whether it's doping or it's financial regulation, whatever it is rubbish. It is incompetent, and why this is so important is because, actually, in response to Simon, and I'm sympathetic to a degree with Simon's view of football agents, but because of the sort of journalism I do, I often get the guys that are trying to play by the rules that speak to me. In this case, I sought Sky out because I got I got to hear about this particular case, because I have been conducting investigations for the last few years into these private football arbitrations and what goes on, and the fact that stuff emerges that's wrong that we never get to hear about. But and that's the point. If you don't regulate it, it is the Wild West, right? And the money, no one's following the money, no one's checking the money, and things happen that are wrong. And as I say, I think in defence of Sky, he's quite unusual in that he came into sports management as a former Olympic athlete, you know? So in his defence, he came into sport and sports management because he'd been at the elite end of sport. He competed in the Olympics and then went into sports management. I think there are different motivations, and I've encountered other agents who find it incredibly frustrating. For instance, Sky mentioned inducements. Agents who lose their clients because illegal inducements are offered and paid. It's happening all the time. And I know agents who I've dealt with very closely over the last few years in working on certain stories who just want to get out because it's not regulated properly and people are getting away with murder.
Yeah. And that's exactly why we don't want to go back to a time like 2008 and a case like this. Sky, is there anything you want to say about your own industry? I mean, you were manfully defending yourself with Simon in full flow moments ago. But Matt makes a good point. You came into this industry for all the right reasons. You've been very successful in it. You have a great reputation, but you would concede there are others who let it down.
I mean, listen, the irony with what me and Simon were going at is that I don't completely disagree with Simon about the industry. But what I disagreed with was the sweeping generalisation. The industry, the way in which some agents have conducted themselves and with inducements and everything, then the rules and regs need to be rewritten. One of the things that I'm very strong about is that if a young player is induced into a representation agreement, whether it's a pair of boots or whether it's a packet of peanuts, that is an inducement. Parents and kids coming into this industry, it's their first and only journey. They need to go and see what the bloody industry is about, excuse my French, before signing with anybody.
Yeah.
Go and see 2 free agents.
Yeah.
Try and understand the industry. Because if someone, I always say to parents when they come to me, if someone standing on the side of a pitch and taps you on the shoulder and says, I want to represent your child, they don't want to represent your child because they're, the fairy godmother or the godfather or the godmother. They just want to represent your child to try and make money out of them, which is what Simon's alluding to. I would like to see the industry cleaned up.
That's not what I'm alluding to. And the point, you missed my point. I believe that agents representing grown men, not young boys that are 16, 17, getting the scholarships and their first pro contracts, that's not the area I'm focusing on. You guys, and you've taken exception, you may be the exception, it doesn't disprove the rule. Fine, okay, well, you can take exception, right? And I'll exclude you as the 1%.
Thank you.
But agents, as a rule, make their money by moves that players get. And without players getting moves, there tends to be a limited amount of opportunity for agents to make money. So that, to my issue with agents, and I'll exclude you from this conversation for the purpose of the observations that you've made, is that there is a division that's often created by an agenda that an agent has to facilitate a solution for a player, whether that's a player wanting to leave to a bigger, better club, not break his contract, but do what Riyad Mahrez did or do what another player does when they don't get precisely what they want. And at the centre of it, more often than not, is not an agent providing a cohesive relationship with a football club that signed the player, paid the agent in the first place. It's an agent going, I can make another set of money by another move. And that is at the centre of your industry. And most of you might be the exception, survive and thrive through that opportunity. That's not inducement. That's not breaking rules.
I think that's
just
inarguable,
divisive.
to be honest,
that's
guys.
Just divisive.
It's inarguable.
Well,
Players make their money, as he says. Agents make their money out of player movement.
Yeah, but some players don't even know what the agents are getting.
Sure.
But that's a different discussion.
We're going to finish on this, Matt, this lunchtime. Second guess it for me. This one relating to Defoe in 2008 going from Tottenham to Portsmouth and this alleged unlicensed agent. And you've been forensic, as you always are, a 2-year investigation. What's the end game? How will it finish?
Crikey, that is really hard to answer. But I just, I think that depends on how deep the FA is prepared to go in investigating what actually happened. They need to acquire all the evidence. They need to acquire the phone records. They need to go back through the files. If they haven't got them, they need to get them. And they need to properly study the evidence, because I think the evidence is there that points, as I say, certainly potentially very serious breaches
Have the FA got
of regulations.
The files? Have they got the files? I don't even know. To be honest.
I'm not sure they know at the moment.
Matt Lawton, extraordinary journalistic work on your behalf as always. Thank you so much for joining us. Sky Andrew, thanking you.
Thanks. Lovely to see you, Simon, as always.
Nice to see you too, Sky.
Do you want to see the boys out in the building? We're rolling towards 1 o'clock. It's Tuesday lunchtime.
Jim White and Simon Jordan. Monday to Friday mornings from 10 on AM, on DAB, via the talkSPORT app and on your smart speaker. talkSPORT.